Hi, this is Jeff Cropscott, President of Cropscott Consulting Partners. And for those of you that were with us earlier this week, you got an introduction to the topic of risk assessment. And we promised you before the end of the week a more detailed, deeper dive on risk assessment. In determining the best way to go about this, we thought that we would provide you with a reasonably short video today, kind of expounding on what we talked about on Tuesday, which is, I'll call an executive summary today. And we've also recorded a more detailed version of the deep dive, if you will, that could be beneficial to everyone, but particularly to the practitioners, compliance officers, and auditors, and so forth. So for those seeing this video today, know that we'll provide a link to this video as well as a separate link to the more detailed video, which will be available on YouTube, depending on which version you want to take a look at. So in quick summary, risk management should not be equated with risk avoidance. Regulators on the one end of the perspective, or the spectrum, I should say, may want us to be risk avoiders. Others might want to take more aggressive risk. Many of us fall right in the middle. But we need to take risk to survive, to compete, and to be relevant. So that's one of the key points I'd like to point out today. Risk appetite is something that's important to be considering. If you're a larger, more sophisticated institution, regulations likely require you to perform a risk appetite exercise and to have a written risk appetite statement. We recommend that all institutions, whether required or not, put together a risk appetite statement, which really helps the whole institution understand the level and types of risk that the institution's willing to take to meet its strategic objectives. That's something that's very important too when we get to the end of the risk assessment process and we're taking a look at each of the risks that factored in as the most significant from a residual risk standpoint, and we're trying to figure out whether we want to accept that risk, whether we want to avoid that risk, or fall somewhere in between, perhaps even share that risk through insurance or otherwise. There are a number of different methodologies for performing the risk assessments, and if you're interested in the detail on those, please refer to the more detailed, what I mentioned as a practitioner's version of today's deeper dive, a link of which will be included on LinkedIn to the more detailed YouTube video. Finally, a few things for the consideration of executives. One, regulators are becoming increasingly interested in having administrative account reviews be performed by somebody other than the trust officers administering the accounts. In my past life, we made a transition to having a risk and compliance team perform these responsibilities for a more independent review. This meant instead of having 15 to 20 people doing the reviews for all the accounts in the trust company, it was now transitioning to 3. We certainly weren't in a position where we could double the size of our staff to do all the reviews, so we went through a process where we effectively put accounts into different types of buckets based on the risks present in those types of accounts. We did this following the guidance and the permissions, if you will, of our regulators, which allowed us to take a risk-based approach to how we perform our administrative account reviews. And we were able to include some in an annual time frame, which is what is traditional. Some we found to be even more risky and we wanted to look at more frequently, and others we were able to bump out as many as 3 years. So a very scalable solution that allowed us to do reviews that reflected the level of risk associated with an account and to save money in doing so. A second way that we used risk assessment was in figuring out the scope and the frequency of audits and compliance testing. We have the flexibility, at least on the audit side, under Regulation 9 of the Comptroller of the Currency, to perform either an annual review where you cover all important elements of the trust company's operations in a year's time, or to do a continuous audit where, based on the results of a risk assessment, you look at more risky activities every year and progressively less risky activities on an expanded basis, maybe every 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever the case might be. The importance is having the risk assessment, being able to document why certain activities will be looked at on a shorter term time frame and why others will be done on a longer term time frame. But that allows flexibility, scalability, and again, cost savings in many cases. Finally, we know that our regulators are very interested in anti-money laundering and anti-money laundering programs. Well, there's guidance in the FFIEC manual on anti-money laundering programs. No two programs are the same. You could have a community bank with very traditional activities, all domestically based, versus a more complex institution with complex accounts and folks living domestically and internationally, and the risk profile of the institutions will be different. And the complexity and the robustness of the, and formality, I should say, of the anti-money laundering programs and the suspicious activity monitoring processes and other elements should vary based on the perceived risk level of the institution. So that's another opportunity that the regulators give us to use the results of the risk assessment either to say the anti-money laundering program needs to be more robust, or it could be more basic for an institution that doesn't show as much risk in that regard. So those are kind of the summary issues that I wanted to share with you today. Certainly if you're interested in taking the deeper dive at the practitioner's level, like I said, that video will also be available through a link in LinkedIn to the video out on YouTube. But we're grateful to have the opportunity to be with you again this week, and we look forward to meeting with you next week on a new topic. Till then, take care and enjoy your weekend.